Recording. Okay, perfect.
Perfect.
Need to be twice happening. Okay.
Okay.
There we go.
All right, everyone, welcome back to the Contrarians. This is another of my favorite type of panel, the thought exercise. I like to think of these as wise music swamis talking about stuff. And if anybody gets their nose up about the wise music swamis, that's just a fun term Martin came up with a couple of years ago, and I love it, so I'm going to own it. So today we are talking about the impact of unlimited music. We're going to start off with the impact on our own listening habits. But I thought it would be fun to start off with a quote from Danny Filth from Cradle of Filth. So he's got an interview that's been making the rounds. It was with Rock Hard Grease, where he talks about how the music industry is going downhill. It's hard to make money. And very specifically, he says, it doesn't help when people just have this inbuilt idea that it's not a privilege to get music, that music is something that should be given away free. And he said, this is a paraphrase, but post-2006, consumers value access over ownership and experience over assets. Let's see how that plays out as we go through our panelists here and hear how unlimited music has affected your listening habits. Let's start with Davey Gallagher. Davey, welcome back.
Thanks.
What do you got?
Thank you. Who was that quote from? Danny Filth?
Yes.
From the Philadelphia Filths, I take it. An old distinguished family of Filths. Obviously, he's right. We have, even just before we came on air, I think one of the last sentences uttered was, I'll save this to the cloud. So we're in a brave new world of technology, which is rapidly advancing. Reid, you even mentioned AI before the show. So we don't want to be Luddites and stand in the way of progress. So generally speaking, I like to think that as a society, it's a good thing to always move with the times. However, there's always the detrimental side to that. So when it comes to my own experience with changing media and listening habits, obviously coming up through the 1990s, the privilege of having a Sony Walkman as your sole companion walking to school and back was an absolute marvel. And with that came the curation of you could only afford with your pocket money however many cassettes. I mean, I did have a CD Walkman, but those things, I mean, if you sneezed in their general direction, they would skip. So, they were just useless. So I stuck with the tapes much longer than most people probably did, as a malleable, movable format. Excuse me, that's an important call for someone. That'll be from the people at Spotify trying to cut this conversation short. The general change around the millennium was that people did start to talk about burning CDs and started to talk about Napster and all of these things. What's this? You can get things free all of a sudden. But that did take a while to manifest. Yeah, I mean, I must admit in my younger, more vulnerable years, to rather gallantly quote Scott Fitzgerald on a Friday evening, I did take advantage of such things and download things because it was, I was with Chuck D. He was advocating illegal piracy. And it wasn't until later that I realized that it's theft. It is theft. So I jumped onto the other bandwagon of back to physical media at a very young age, and I've never gotten off that train again. And I think it makes you appreciate what you have much more when you don't have this capacity for just, I own everything. It must, everything belongs to me potentially. But then streaming comes along. What does streaming do? It essentially gives you a version of that illegal downloading scenario in which you can access just about everything ever made by anybody in some format, depending on what service you're subscribed to. And the artist ultimately ends up with a pittance more than they would if you were stealing from them in the first place anyway. So it's, again, catch-22 for the artist. A lot of contracts were signed just like in film, a lot of contracts were signed not thinking ahead to streaming, of course. So a lot of people are only getting royalties on a dwindling physical media market and not on the streaming market. So they're losing out massively. So I, generally speaking, do try and support physical media as much as possible every time. But of course, that isn't possible. You can't possibly listen to everything. And then we're also in this age of, because they're selling less product, the record companies and film companies and any producer of physical media wants to charge you a lot more. So they will do so by having massive box sets and limited editions, etc., to get their money up front, and to discourage people waiting on sales. And that means that you have to be a little more cash rich to be able to afford just to keep up with the Joneses, never mind to do well and listen to a lot and keep current. But overall, the situation now, I think, is forcing people into their own little pigeonholes, where you are encouraged by the streaming services, say Spotify. If you like, well, I don't know, Bob Dylan, it's only going to recommend you things that are very similar to Bob Dylan forever and a day thereafter. It's only ever going to say you might like Neil Young, you might like Gordon Lightfoot, you might like blah, blah, blah. If you like Chuck Berry, it's only going to recommend you Bo Diddley or Muddy Waters. It's not going to take a chance and say, what's the modern equivalent? Let's try and twist on that. It's always going to give you bias confirmation. And through that, people are stuck in their own little worlds and little bubbles. And we're not, as a society, encouraged by the streaming services to have a gander, as it were, to other areas of media, to other things that we might not take a chance on. Whereas if you just picked up a cassette based on, oh, this is only £1 and it's got a cool cover, what is it? No idea. There's your punt taken. So it's never been easier to access all this wonderful new world, but it's also never been lazier for people to not even attempt to do so. So again, catch-22, to keep using that phrase. It's all there for everybody, but the human mind, I can't remember the name of it, but the human mind can only handle, I think it's 12 choices before it starts to freak out. And anything more than that, I'm sure we've all done it, you can sit on Netflix, and although you've got 50,000 movies, because it's not been curated for you and brought down to a manageable number, all of a sudden you find yourself sitting for half an hour just going, no. So essentially it's down to curation for me, where you have to, I still enjoy my MP3 player and just putting, say, 25 albums on it. That's my preferred medium when I'm out and about, and listening to FLAC files, because I can curate it, it's manageable, I won't spend half the time just thinking about what I'm going to listen to, and I can go into all sorts of different areas. And crucially, when it comes to buying anything, I buy hard physical media, preferably from the artist direct. I know it's not something everybody can afford to do. We don't want to be elitist about it. Streaming has made things much more egalitarian, but at the same time, it's not been liberating for the artists themselves. It's very easy for them to make the product and to get it out into the marketplace now, but much more difficult to make a career from it. Again, catch-22. So those are some kind of amorphous thoughts that hopefully you can turn to something in your head. So thank you.
Nice. Excellent.
Right.
Very cool.
Thanks, Davey. And for the audience, we're going to have a general discussion at the end of this. And I would just like to point out, for irony's sake, that Davey was saying he didn't want us to be too academic, but I'm not the person who introduced the idea of concept bias to this discussion. So let us move on to David Alpizar. David, what have you got?
Yeah, tough act to follow. Well done, Davey. In kind of preparing for this and thinking about, how I might approach it, a saying came to mind for me anyway. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And I think for me, as you probably can see behind me, I'm still, have not let go of the physical media. My entry point into really kind of getting into music and collecting and in a serious way, sort of was on the cusp of the cassette CD era. So the end of cassette and the intro to CD. So, my initial collection sort of was a lot of cassettes, and then was my preferred, medium at that point. And then, like a lot of people did, converted a lot of that stuff to, started the convenience of a CD, and sort of converted that catalog to CDs, and and that was sort of what I did. And I think as in today's world of sort of the unlimited, thinking in terms of this idea of the unlimited music, I've certainly adopted some of the apps and streaming, and but more out of convenience than anything else. I think that I don't really consume music via YouTube, and I will use Spotify, but like I said, more of a convenience factor. I'm in the car, you plug the iPhone in, and it's all happening on my dashboard, and I don't have to fiddle with CDs in the car and all that nonsense. Although I've found that, when I get a new record, or a new album from an artist that either a legacy artist is still putting out new records, which, I still support that and still, will buy and consume that, or a new artist that I'm getting into, if I will buy the physical media, typically I'll still buy a CD and I'll keep it in the car. I found that if I try to consume something new on Spotify, I might listen to it once, and then it sort of falls by the wayside. But I try to go, when I was 15, you buy a new CD, it sits in the car for 2 weeks. I'm just spinning the thing, I'm getting a chance to, really absorb it and get to know it. And so I think, I found that, for a period of time, I was buying new music and I was listening to it maybe once, and it was getting in a pile, and a lot is coming at me. And so I find that if I leave the CD in the car for a period of time, like when I was 15, I didn't have a choice, that thing just sits there, I can really get to know that record. Maybe I like it, maybe I don't, but one or two spins is not going to tell me what that, what I really think of it. Is it going to resonate with me and be something that I'm going to hang on to, or is it going to be something that's going to maybe go into the collection and not come out very often, but like I said, Spotify convenience. Certainly if I'm working out or something like that, having the phone is really convenient with the AirPods. If we've ever most of us probably have tried to jog with a Discman, as it skips every third step, that got old really quick. The idea of having a CD on my jog when I was 15 was awesome, though in practice it was really dumb because the thing skips every other step, right? So having the digital media, I think, has been really an area of convenience. Although I have noticed, and I think that I think a lot of people, my peers, my friends, same age group, have adopted more of the non-physical streaming than I have. They utilize YouTube heavily, or Spotify, primarily for consuming music. And for me, it's noticeable the difference between if I'm playing a particular artist on Spotify in my car and then put in a CD. The A to B comparison is night and day, right? The sound quality of physical media versus streaming, while convenient. I think to me, it's just the difference between HD and not HD, right? But if you don't have anything to compare it to, you can listen to Spotify all day long. And if that's all you're listening to, you're sort of accustomed to the lower volume and doesn't sound, as you can't hear things as clearly. To me, it sound, the volume is lower and it doesn't sound as the clarity isn't there. And I could put that same album on CD and, it's night and day. So my habits, today have not changed dramatically. I have not, abandoned the physical, like most of us on this call probably. I still like to read the liner notes and look at the pictures and check out the artwork and all the stuff that I did when I was 15 and 16, and all that. And so, I still enjoy doing that. And, and to Davey's point, still there's an element of, while I buy physical for me, there's an element of supporting the artist. A lot of, lot of the the artists that I enjoyed, obviously I can buy Metallica's new album on CD and it's a drop in the bucket for them. But there's a lot of artists that, were in bands that I grew up with. They're now doing some side stuff that are just putting things out independently. And I can certainly stream that. But if I know that if I purchase a CD directly from them or their website or their independent label, that it's going to be much more beneficial to them. So while I do it for me, there is an element of, hey, if I'm supporting this, they might put out another record, right? Or, if it costs them too much to put out a record, they may not put out another one, and then I may not, and we may not get new music out of this particular individual artist, whatever. And I like new music from classic artists. I like artists that continue to be creative and don't sort of fall into the nostalgia act bucket. And so that's a thing. So yeah, I think for me, just to sum it up, I think, while I've adopted some streaming, it's more of a matter of convenience. I still, how I consume music in sort of the unlimited age is not too dissimilar to how I did, in the age of CDs and cassette tapes. So I'll put a period there and hand it off. And I know we've got some other discussion later on, so I'll jump off my soapbox.
All right, we'll see if we have time for the other discussion. Thank you very much, David. And anybody watching this video, I'm sure, and definitely the panelists on this video, should understand that none of us are casual music listeners, right? We do not qualify in that category. We are so far out on the bell curve of music listeners that you really can't generalize our experiences, I think, to casual music listeners. So, just keep that in mind when you hear people talk about their listening habits. All right, Nick, what have you got for us this afternoon?
Thanks, Reed. I'm probably a variation on the theme so far. I think I find myself presently with one foot in the past and at least one in the present, maybe a little bit in the future. I've been self-described as a semi-hoarder, so I've always been collecting physical product and amassing. But I'm also interested in experiences too, whether it's concerts, just meeting an artist and having a conversation and that kind of thing. So I think I like the best of both worlds. So I still collect, although I'm a little more refined in how I do it. But I also am interested in experiences. Maybe one way for me to kind of describe my pre-internet, post-internet behavior is to describe pre-internet. I grew up music formation, late 70s, early 80s, where I'm listening to vinyl, listening to cassettes, primarily with a little bit of 8-tracks, but then also a healthy dose of radio. Radio was a main conduit for me to learn about music, develop interests. I'm lesser of a child of MTV, but I am a bit, not having come to my locale and my parents getting the cable until maybe the mid 80s. But so, that's sort of part of it. But I learned about music, not having fully formed ideas and opinions yet. The thing for me is, and talking about my behavior, when you have vinyl, you have to be patient. I didn't skip around the vinyl. I let it play through. When you're listening to cassettes, I think maybe as I got older, I'd fast forward or reverse. But in the pre-internet days, I was more forgiving of an album, let's say, and a piece of music. So I would listen to things, listen all the way through, and maybe pick up stuff where things weren't my favorite, but I still had that kind of patience to kind of like learn and listen and digest information and digest the music. And so that sort of like sets it up for me and how I pre-internet and then post-internet. I mean, even pre-internet, my taste not being fully formed, I still was in my own zone. I was basically hard rock and metal, and it would be tough for me to get me outside of the zone, outside of the radio. But what happens then, I think it started actually before the internet, but it started with the CD era, where you can get a CD in the early 90s, mid 90s, and then play it, and then you can jump around. So my patience was a little bit less. So you can go from track 1 to 3 to 5 to 7, whereas when you're listening to the vinyl, you're listening all the way through, or listening to a side all the way through and still a cassette. But then when the internet hit, you had this wonderful experience. Well, I can click a mouse and get my favorite song downloaded, sometimes for free. And I can click around an album quickly. And that seemed to be mirror how we are now with our cell phones, where we can kind of scroll and click. And you could do it for an hour. And then at the end of it, not even realize what you did and clicked. And you went from listening to an album all the way through for 40 minutes. And now you may have sampled just the first 10 or 20 seconds of an album all the way through. So my attention has become more gnat-like. I have less discipline, less patience is probably the right word, to sit there and listen to something all the way through. And for me, and thinking about this topic, that's been the big difference. Pre-internet, I had the discipline and patience because that's what I knew, to listen something. And now, if something doesn't move me right off the bat, I'm on to the next thing, which is probably unfortunate. Yes, I have all this choice that we've just talked about and all this opportunity, but at the same time, I may be missing out on things. So that's kind of the downside of it too, the yin and the yang. As far as the new technology goes, though, the upside is, we have the Spotify, which I use. I'm on a family plan, so the cost is fantastic. I mean, there's no commercials. You're getting it for almost a pittance, and everything is there. And one of the problems is with the algorithms, you may be in your own little silo. However, something like Spotify has taken the place of radio, which was a main conduit for me. Radio to me is dead. I mean, it's not what it was growing up in the 70s and 80s. So Spotify has replaced that. YouTube has replaced that. The technology of both those streaming and YouTube has allowed me to, in playing music and being a weekend warrior on the bass, learn music more efficiently, better, higher quality. Being able to do it on my own. So those kinds of things for me, I've been such a welcome change. I agree that technology and the listening experience may not be what it was, but at the same time, even back in the day, I'm listening to cassettes on a boombox or a lousy car stereo. So I've always had and actually, as some people know me on the Contrarians, I'll listen to also music on a Victrola. So I have a low bar for quality of the listening experience. So for me, I do like that choice. I do like that opportunity. Another thing, besides radio, I used to get a lot of my prop for today, and Martin knows this. A lot of my information came from magazines like Circus, and then right before the internet, Goldmine. And so I used to read it. I used to digest it. I used to love it. And those things are still there, and Goldmine's online. But it seems more like, and it's been alluded to, we have all this choice, and then with all the choice, these things get crowded out. I don't, so you have all this, but where is it? It's not in my mailbox. I have to go search it out sometimes. So a lot of that influence for me and those things aren't there anymore. So the streaming and the internet and things like YouTube have taken the place of that physical media. Another thing, one more, I didn't mention it before, but back in the 70s and 80s, I would learn about music besides the radio and through friends, through older people, through the guy who owned the used record store. And so those opportunities all there, maybe with friends, they're not there as plentifully anymore when you're a kid and in grade school or high school. And so the algorithm has replaced some of those things, but I don't have that constant conduit of friends where you're getting together and say, what have you listened to? Now the Contrarians is a substitute for that too. So you learn a tremendous amount of music, and I've been able to remind myself of the patience that I need to listen to new things in the internet age because of things like the internet or things like the Contrarians. So that the internet has helped me to remind myself that I used to have that patience to be able to sit through something and not dismiss it based on the name alone, because there's good value there. So I hope that sort of answers where we're at, but I look at it for me, how am I, psychologically and emotionally processing all this?
Very cool.
Nice.
Thanks, Nick.
Excellent.
Okay, I'm actually going to go next because I'm going to be doing reading over some research I did later, and I don't want everyone to have to sit through me talking for an extended period of time. So interestingly, unlimited music has almost not changed the way I consume music at all, because of some of it's to do with my personal psychology, which isn't that much different from everybody else's psychology. But think of it this way. If everything has exactly the same value, then everything has no value. So if you have all of the music in the world at your fingertips and it all has the same value, then music is worthless. I only want to listen to specific stuff, but if it has no worth to me, I have no emotional attachment. I literally have no investment in it. And kind of like what Nick was saying is I discovered when I was listening to Amazon Music or Spotify, that if something doesn't grab me, next, next, next. Whereas if I buy a CD, and it has to be a physical thing, I even discovered that buying MP3s didn't have the correct psychological effect. I have to have that physical thing, and then I go, okay, I will listen to this. And if it didn't grab me the first time, I have this thing that I have now sworn, 10 or 15 or $20 worth of allegiance to, and I'm going to give it another shot and see if I like it next time. And I've learned over many, many years of being a music fan to gauge the arc. If I listen 2 or 3 times and I can tell it's going up, then I keep listening. And if it is not going up, then I'm like, okay, I gave it a shot. I got my money's worth out of it. Ironically, with an unlimited listening environment, I never feel like I have my money's worth out of what I'm getting. Even though you think, oh, you could listen to anything. Yeah, it doesn't do it for me. I'll tell you what has 100% changed my listening habits much more than I ever expected, and that's the Contrarians. I have listened to and purchased so much music because of participating in this channel. Talking to people, listening to people that are passionate about music makes you go, oh man, I need some of that passion, right? I can use that in my life. So I'm going to check that out. And you know what? Half of the time I don't like it because I'm not the person who felt that way. But I still had the experience of listening to it. And that is extremely valuable to me. And it doesn't come through in a streaming media. The one exception I make is I'm on YouTube Premium because I hate commercials on YouTube. And you get YouTube Music. And occasionally, if I need to listen to an album that I don't own for one of these Contrarian panels, I'll go to YouTube Music. But I always resent it because I know I'm getting the worst possible audio quality out of that experience. All right, I'm going to have a bunch to say after we go through this first round, so I'm going to leave it there. And Philip Edward, let's do you next.
Right. Again, thanks for having me over here, and great to hear all these different opinions and to see that we have some common points as well in our experiences, which is interesting and cool, since obviously, I'm much younger than many of you, but still we have some points in common. First, I want to say that it's kind of difficult to not get a little bit academic and to not talk about the whole idea of media convergence, this idea that all media are collapsing into one medium, if you like. And in the same way that someone like about film, let's say like someone like Martin Scorsese or David Lynch would say that now you can just watch a film on your phone in your toilet. Now you can, listen to the new Metallica on your phone with lousy quality in your toilet. It's become a very solitary kind of experience where you consume media in the same way that you would consume at a all-you-can-eat buffet. It's also difficult not to be a little bit political about this, because we are basically talking about the most ultimate stage of the commodification of art and as by these massive companies that are just basically cash machines like Spotify, and at some point this will implode, as we can see now that vinyl has become so much more popular, and you have people like yourselves who are collecting still, like myself as well, the physical product. But it's also difficult not to be nostalgic, unfortunately, which is a little bit, has become a little bit of a cliche, I guess, to be nostalgic. For me, it really comes down to one thing, and that is I have here also my little show and tell. I've mentioned before that I'm originally from Greece, and I grew up in a small city on an island where we had, back in the mid-90s, when I started really collecting CDs and listening to tons of bands and metal and rock and blues and prog and everything. And there was a bunch of record shops I had access to as a kid, and I loved spending time there. And thanks to some of these places, I discovered some really obscure local bands that you cannot find today on Spotify or on YouTube anywhere, like this little Greek band over here called Horizon's End, a Greek prog band that went on a long hiatus. Now they reappeared. Anyway, I would go to the shop, to this record store that was really full of many obscure things, rarities. And the guy over there, he knew me. I was really going like every day after school. Basically, I would go to that record shop, and every time he had something interesting for me, he was like my algorithm back then, the owner of this record shop. He knew what I liked. He knew that I was really into prog when I was a teenager, into like, I don't know, Dream Theater and Rush and that sort of thing. And he said to me, hey, listen, I got this new prog album. It's a debut album. You're really going to like it. It's your kind of thing. But the CD back then had either it usually had a sticker on the side over here, some kind of security or some kind of sticker to keep it sealed. And he couldn't just tear it open. So what he would do is that he would go on the sides of the CD and open it from here, from the back, right? Slowly pulling over the sides essentially. And he would open it and put the CD in his player, give me the headphones, and I could sit there for 2 hours and listen. And obviously, first of all, with the arrival of pirating and Napster and all that, all these record shops, especially small ones in small provincial cities like mine, started disappearing. Of course, they closed down and they became cafes or restaurants or whatever. Sadly, those restaurants or cafes still exist, but the record shop doesn't. So that disappeared. Eventually, I really got into pirating myself. So of course, I'm guilty of that when I was a student. And then, now, of course, I do have a Spotify account, and I've really started in the last year to feel this saturation that comes with over consuming music. I mean, how do you consume music? You consume, I don't know, burgers, or you consume some kind of commodity, right? But how do you consume music, right? So I've reached this point now where I have also like a premium account on Spotify. I pay my subscription. I don't have ads. Great. And I have on my phone like a list of albums, but you don't really own anything. It's all just digital. You've lost literally any contact with a physical product, with something that feels like it's really a tangible representation of the music and of the band that you love. And yeah, you feel saturated, and you should, especially if you were like a hoarder with some kind of inherent OCD complex, you start to feel like listening to music on streaming is almost like some kind of compulsion. You have to listen to all of this stuff because there's like unlimited choices. So you want to listen to this band and that band and that band, and you start to even, well, me at least, I start to even think like, how old am I? How many more years do I have left on this planet? Do I have enough time to listen to all of these bands, which all of them sound so interesting, and the algorithm is proposing to me all these different things? I really don't have the time to listen to all of this music. You reach this point where you need to start going back to a more slow form of consumption of music, which means really getting a proper sound system, not listening anymore on those little JBL speakers, and listening to a CD from beginning to end, and learn how to appreciate it in the same way that people talk about slow food. I guess that those are my thoughts on the subject. Yeah, I'll stop it there. Otherwise, I will start rambling and get into it on all the political and academic stuff as well.
All right. Well, maybe we'll come back around to that. But thank you very much, Philip Edward. That was good stuff. All right, Martin, what have you got?
Well, so I once had 11,000 vinyl. It's down to 5,000. I still have 18,000 CDs. When I got my second computer in my office on my desk, I actually didn't have room for my turntable anymore, packed it away. I still like having the vinyl that I have because it has, sentimental value. I mean, a lot of it is stuff I bought as a kid in the 70s. I don't even play the CD, so everything I play is on Spotify. Playing anything for me starts, though, with Wikipedia, because Spotify has the annoying thing where it's all the new stuff and all the compilations and all the live albums all the way down. You got to scroll. So you have to look up what you want to play anyways, right? I have no interaction with any algorithms because I don't literally play. So I type it in and I play it, right? So it starts with Wikipedia, and between Spotify and YouTube's very important because between those two, you truly have everything. I'm not sure if I've ever been stumped with not being able to play something. So again, it does come down to how much time do you have on this earth, or how much are you dedicating to the leisure activity of listening to music? I listen to talk more than I listen to music for leisure, number one. So it's already taken a huge slice out. So for me, I've had one little experiment that's kind of interesting is that I've been recently getting into the Susie and the Banshees catalog, right? So I go on Spotify and I make sure I play the same album over and over and over and over again. Then I play another one, the 1984 album, the 1986 album, over and over and over again. And then I got to thinking, like, number one, I buy no physical ever anymore. I haven't bought physical for years, right? I don't have room for it. I always regret it. I never play it. To me, I start with Wikipedia. I play Spotify. I go to Discogs if I want to see all the artwork, and I go to A/Z lyrics, which is a no-nonsense way to find all your lyrics all in one place. Boom, boom, boom. Super easy to get the lyrics that way. My three best stereos, none of them are an old school home stereo. One is like the $99 woofer and tweeters pointed right at my head on my desk. The other one is my two iPods, my iPod Classics, which both have 5,000 albums on them. And the loading up of those is over with because the computers are old and cranky and they're full, and I can't change any of that music. I can't figure out how, but that's fine. I almost like want to force myself to focus on these 10,000 albums over and over again, and at least have some kind of a closed shop, right? When I get into my car, that's my other stereo that's better than any $20,000 stereo I can possibly even have. And it's stock. It came with the damn car, right? In the old days, we used to buy car stereos, and I used to install car stereos, and I used to sell stereos, sell car stereos, sell home stereos. All of that's over with, right? The stock stereo. So I got the iPod with my $60 all the way into the ear buds is one amazing stereo. The one sitting on my desk is another amazing stereo, and the one in my car is another amazing stereo, and the actual old school stereo equipment is a distant fourth from all of those. So that takes care of that. There's a New York Times article recently about Vienna and renting, and how Vienna has gotten renting accommodation down to a fine art, and people live. We're supposed to be enlightened and not need to have, we're supposed to not need ownership, right? When you get more enlightened, you realize that you can't take any of it with you, and it's all ephemeral, and the pure enjoyment of music is supposed to be literally just that connection with listening to it. So the ownership thing is almost like we haven't moved from the Zen, from a lesser Zen state of needing that physical to this state. But I totally understand it. So to go back around to the Susie and the Banshees thing, I started thinking to myself, okay, so what would satisfy what I'm missing something here with just having this digital, but the only thing I want to own is I want to go out and find an original copy, because this is the book collector guy in me too. Like, this whole first edition thing matters a lot to me. So I would have no attachment to a CD version of a Susie and the Banshees album from 1983. Don't care. I would have no attachment to a reissue of it on vinyl. That's a toy to me. The only thing I want to own is an original, preferably something from the UK, because that's where they're from. So and it's almost like I wouldn't even care if it was all scratched up or beat up. I just literally want the paper and that vinyl, because I'm not ever going to play it. I just want to own the original paper goods and vinyl of it. So that's the only thing that would give me the sentimental attachment to it, and none of those other things would at all. So yeah, it's and just finally on the point of just being inundated with all this stuff, I think it definitely, Nick, I love your example of how, as you move through all those formats, your need for patience goes down and down and down until you get to Spotify. And I'm literally on Spotify playing 3 or 4 seconds of each song. and bouncing around and going to find another album and then finding the other album by the band and scrolling up and going all over that way. So it's gotten so much easier. Cassette's actually the hardest out of all of them. Yeah, I think it goes cassette, vinyl, CD, digital, right? So yeah, I think it'd be weird to complain about having all this music at your fingertips. It's like a great thing that you have it all, and it's so easy to research and find stuff. And like me writing books on this stuff, it's like I go, man, I can write a book on independent punk singles and just like I have access of thousands and thousands of them from the late 70s even, right? They're not on Spotify. They're hard to find on Spotify, but they're all on YouTube, right? So yeah, I don't know where we go with this. I understand not owning physical because of this experiment that I've been having in my head with the Susie and the Banshee stuff, but I literally, like I say, playing music for me starts with Wikipedia, goes to Spotify. If it ain't on Spotify, it's on YouTube. If I pull a CD or a vinyl off the shelf, it's because I got to look up the liner notes and they're too small on Discogs. That's literally the shortcoming. That's the one thing missing for me with physical that I can't have is sometimes I literally can't find a readable version of the liner notes on the internet. Because you can't find a picture to blow up big enough to read the fine print. So if you don't have that vinyl or the CD of it, you're missing that. But yeah, it's I have so little actual attachment to any, even of my vinyl or my CDs. I've none to even original CDs that I bought in the 90s because I'm old by the 90s, right? But I do have attachment to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of my records that I actually bought in the 70s. And even more so if I've got the band to sign it now. It's been blessed, it's been christened, and it can't kind of leave my collection now. It's so important to me. It's literally the most sentimental thing I have. But try to even for me to go back to try to feel sentimental value for a CD from 1990 or 1991 by one of my favorite bands like Trouble, and it's signed by Trouble. It's just the magic ain't there. It's the only magic I have. It literally has to be from before 1983. So yeah, a lot of concepts there. I'll leave it there.
Wow. It sounds like about one more time around the wheel and you'll be ready to ascend to nirvana, giving up that physical attachment.
Well, once Elon Musk puts all this music right in our head and we just have to think about it and play it off of a chip in our head, then it's even more closer to us than clicking on Spotify, right?
Indeed.
That would be a post-apocalyptic scenario, right?
We'll get there. All right. Lots of fascinating information there. Now, if people will indulge me, I was telling the group I was doing some research. Some AI-enabled research before we did this topic. And I would like to just throw out a couple of things to consider. We can talk about it or not, as people wish, but just on a couple of topics. One is on music in general and the survival of music, and the other is on the economics of streaming. So the survival of music, I think, is perhaps the more interesting one. So let's start there. Because this was a thing that I heard and was absolutely fascinated and or horrified by. But according to an article in The Atlantic, printed in January 2022, so about a year and a half old now, which is ironic, which I'll explain in a moment, they had an article called "Is Old Music Killing New Music?" And they had data from something called MRC data that says 70% of music consumed in the United States is catalog music. Now, the definition of catalog music is that it's 18 months old or older. So it's impossible to get a specific idea of, when you say old music, how old is the old music? Well, it's at least 18 months old. But I thought the author of this article made some fascinating points. One of which is, so what? What if it was only 18 months old? When has there ever been a time when the coolest music was from a year and a half ago? When kids were listening to a year and a half ago's music? Pop music is pop music because it's popular now. except what's popular now is not popular now. And if you take that another step out, record companies are putting the vast majority of their money into acquiring old catalogs. Bob Dylan, David Bowie, catalogs from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. This is where they are spending literal hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, those hundreds of millions of dollars would have gone to finding and fostering new talent. So all of that money is regressed. It's gone to perpetrating old artists. And in fact, the 200 most popular tracks on Spotify account for less than 5%. So the 200 most popular tracks, whatever your artist is on Spotify, Taylor Swift is currently the most popular. I looked it up today. Taylor Swift is the most popular artist on Spotify. It doesn't matter. She is part of less than 5% of streams on Spotify. 70% of streams on Spotify in the United States. This is not an international statistic. It may be different in other countries. But in the US, 70% is existing. So that's already 75% of music, meaning that every artist on the planet who is on Spotify is fighting for a share of 25% of music. What does that mean to the idea that we can foster and develop new music? Anybody want to comment?
Well, I'll say one thing, that I am not that sympathetic to musicians who say they can't make money, because there is an abundance of supply of music, way more music than there is demand for it, right? So they're enjoying themselves making art, but there's so much art that they can't expect that their art is going to be the art that's going to be bought, right? There's probably like an album for every person on earth, kind of thing, right? So the fact that it's so fun to make art and it's getting so inexpensive to make art, and most of those roadblocks of making art, like all those baby bands in the 70s had to record with a big producer, right? In a proper recording studio, and it cost $100,000 at least to make a record, right? Every record, or whatever. I mean, the point is that it's so much easier to make art now, and to make good art, and to get your art out there, and to market it and all that stuff. But there's such a fire hose of supply that you can't sensibly think that the world owes you a living, because the supply is like 20 or 30 or 40 fold what the demand is in aggregate, right? And you're right. I mean, part of the problem is that all that supply, it just keeps growing and growing and growing, because it's all there on Spotify for your $15 a month. All the records from 1993 and 1963 and 2003 are all there, and it's just building, right? So that's the tough one, is that there's just so much supply, and it happens in the fiction book world. It probably kind of happens in the nonfiction book world, although that's a little weirder, because there's, if you want a specific thing, a book on a band or something, but it also happens obviously in the visual arts and painting world, right? Sure. You go around to museums and galleries, and you just have dizzying supply. So there's no reason to think there should be enough demand for your particular power metal album, right?
And I'm going to go a lot more into the economics of this, because I find this fascinating. I figure if you click on this video, you're going to be interested in this topic, right? But before we do that, anybody else want to throw in on fostering new music?
Well, the idea of new music in general now means that you can put something out there, but as Martin said, into a massive pool, where there's no guarantee of anything. So although those bands in the 70s and 80s and 90s, yeah, they had no guarantee either, there was a much smaller pond for them to be discovered in. So if you had a good A&R guy behind you, if you had a decent label, then you had a damn good chance. Whereas now, if you don't have anything like that, you've only really got gigging, and trying to just work your way up the Chitlin circuit as it was. So it's almost like we've come full circle to the way things were really old school before people were getting signed, and the music industry was, pre-rock and roll and things, where music was a live phenomenon and medicine shows and the like, where we're not really seeing 99% of the artists who actually make music ever record a single note. And if they do, it's a couple of things on YouTube that maybe get a few dozen views sometimes. And obviously quality never comes into it in the first place, because if you can't discover them, then the quality doesn't matter. It might be your favorite album of all time and you've not got a snowball's chance in hell of ever hearing it in the first place. So it's a needle in a haystack, and the haystack now is just bigger than it was.
It was, or excuse me, it is bigger. A big consequence of this is that the gatekeepers, though, again, because of the older music, they are funneling people towards older music. And Spotify claims that 50% of people are using algorithm-led lists. I looked this up again today. By the way, guys, AI, I'm telling you, next year we can talk about what AI has done to music, because I'm sure it's going to, the second and third order effects of this are going to be enormous.
Well, you can just spend your leisure time listening to made up Queen songs and Freddie Mercury singing AC/DC songs and
Paul McCartney's using
Metallica songs.
to finish the Beatles song.
I've done it. I've spent an hour doing that. And that is the definition of leisure time spent on music, and it's made up music, right? I just want to say one other very quick thing. My gatekeepers, every time I need a gatekeeper, I just go on and look up a top 10 list or a top 20 list of whatever. And I want to read those short paragraphs. I don't have the patience to listen to people talking about music, right? I literally just go there and read those top 20s, those top 100s of a specific genre. I see a name, I type it into Wiki, find their albums, go over to Spotify and play them, right?
Well, there's irony for you. Don't have the patience to listen to people talk about music.
Yes, that's true. It's true.
All right. Well, let's talk about economics for a second. So, because I'm a child of the 80s, I was born in the 60s, but I grew up in the 80s. So I wanted to compare Spotify to radio in the 1980s. And this data is kind of available, although none of the streaming services like to tell exactly what they pay. But what you can get from 2021 is that Spotify pays about $0.0035 per stream. So 3.5%, or excuse me, 35% of 1 penny per stream. For 1 million streams, about $3,500. That is then split between everybody who gets a piece of that, and there are lots and lots of people who get a piece of that. In the 1980s, one radio play was worth about 17 cents. Excuse me, no, 1.7 cents. I've got to look at my decimal places a little bit closer. So, in raw numbers, it was 3 times more. But when you adjust for inflation, it's 15 times more. One radio play in the 1980s was worth 15 times what one stream is worth. So now, let me go back to my idea of new music and why it's struggling. You've got all of these people, and I understand nobody's guaranteed a living from anything, but nonetheless, if you're trying to make a living in music and you're struggling for 25% of the market share, and streaming media was nearly 40% of all music consumed. That doesn't include YouTube. YouTube was a secondary category. It's the second highest. So streaming media is the highest. YouTube is the second highest. Believe it or not, radio still comes in third. But it's only 16%, 16% of music consumed through the radio. So, but on your Spotify, you're making 1/15 of what you made on a radio song in the 1980s. So when they created the diamond certification in the 1980s, because all of a sudden you have these mega artists selling more than 10 million copies, when Michael Jackson selling 20 million copies.
Reed, Nick has a comment. Nick has a comment.
Oh, sorry, I'm waiting for Reed to stop because I had a question, but I also an observation. But so go ahead, Reed, and I'll jump in.
No, now's a good time.
Here's my thing. in comparing these things, you're adjusting for inflation. Okay, we have one play on Spotify, and there's this little fractional thing that they earn. And then you mentioned there's 1.7 cents of a radio play back when. However, when you have the radio play, is that just playing to me, or is that playing to maybe 100, 200,000 people? And so it's a higher rate because you're reaching more people. And so if, let's just use a crazy number, we could play with numbers all day, but if it's 100,000 people it reaches, well, that could be 100,000 plays. And so that difference, even adjusted for inflation, I don't know if that's there. And look at it this way, when you buy a CD, because I know musicians complain that they don't get the royalties, et cetera, from the streaming, and we get so much more money with physical copy. But then again, once you buy the CD, it's over. Whereas with the streaming, it's smaller, but it's a continual stream. So when someone buys the AC/DC Back in Black, they get paid their dollar or whatever it was for the CD. But if you listen to Back in Black itself 15 times, they're continuing to get that stream. So I understand, and I think part of it is maybe the rate, which is a whole economic thing, and what Spotify and other streamers can do. But the difficulty for me, and I know a lot of Spotify, the problem with it is that bands and artists cut shitty deals, and they're cut out of these streams because you got record companies who aren't doing dick anymore, still getting this money that should be going to the artist. So it's not like they're out there doing promotion or doing anything with physical product. They're still getting a chunk of that streaming revenue, and they're not doing anything, but for the fact that they still own the recording, and that's whether they remaster it or do anything with it or not. So I hear you and I agree, but you got to dive into these numbers a little more to kind of see what the real difference is. And we keep getting this constant thing from artists, and I get it. But the other thing I hear is that if you're a new artist or young artist, you can cut your deal right with Spotify. It's not too bad. Your art may be shit, like and Martin's right, which you allude to because the bar's so low now, but you don't have someone in your back pocket like a record company taking a portion of that stream. So I get it, and you'd love to still have radio out there, but radio isn't doing anything nowadays. But I just think we have to be careful when we're talking about those economics, because I think there's another side to it. Not that I have a stockholder in Spotify or work there or anything or any other streamer, but I just know that I just know it's a little more complicated. And you put on good points with all the stuff. I get it, but I just think that I think some things get missed with the streaming.
Well, let me just say, what I'm presenting is just the tiniest tip of the iceberg.
Right.
This is what I was telling Martin, especially with the AI, it's so easy to follow these rabbit holes. There's a lot more I could go into, but we're rolling up on an hour. So let me leave you with one. Oh, I'm sorry, Philip, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say that to come back to the point about the Danny Filth interview and his incendiary quote. He also says in that interview that from the, I don't know, more than 1 million streams that Cradle of Filth have on Spotify, quote unquote, he has earned himself 20 pounds. That's what he says he has only earned, because from all the earnings that come in from streams, he has to pay so many other people, crew, band members, I don't know who else. And when it comes, when it just comes down to himself, he earns 20 pounds. I'm just quoting him.
Right.
That's very fascinating.
That's very true.
Again, it becomes cyclical. Back to point that I briefly made, that music again has become a device to advertise your tours, which is where you can actually make money. So we're through the looking glass, where the tour used to be something to advertise your album. It's now very much the reverse. And it's worth noting as well, Spotify are not a music platform, they're an audio platform. So they are giving Joe Rogan, who couldn't probably play a lick on a guitar, tens of millions of dollars a year, whilst pleading poverty about musicians. They gave Harry and Meghan, was it $20 million for their podcast, and they only had to do 5 shows. So I think we can see why artists in the music realm are a bit egregious when it comes to royalties, when literally royalties can walk up to Spotify HQ and get $20 million because of who they are, just to produce 6 hours of content.
Right. Okay, let me let me leave one last thought, because this is just an interesting fact. Spotify had their first quarter earnings call in the first quarter. In the first quarter of 2023, Spotify lost $172 million. So when we're talking about how much money Spotify is making, no, Spotify has never made a penny. Spotify is hemorrhaging money, and more than $170 million in one quarter. And that's actually better than last year. It's 14% better than last year. So again, here's our most popular streaming platform, and it is losing money hand over fist. So once again, what does that mean for the long term of music? I don't know, but it can't be good. There's no way to spin $172 million loss into a good thing.
So is Disney, so is Netflix. They are hemorrhaging money left, right, and center. So as Philippe mentioned, we're in the Wild West essentially of this cloud-based system, and it all has to come to an end. Nobody knows how that will happen, but it has to come to some kind of conclusion. Just like the dot-com bubble in the 90s, everything comes to the days of wine and roses have to come to an end, and there'll be, I'm sure that it always seems to be Disney. I'm sure there'll be some conglomerate that ends up owning the whole shebang, and then the curation is done by nobody and nothing, and you're just drip fed absolute everything. As joked about, it might as well be Elon Musk just putting chips in Rhea, because nobody's making money out of it. Everything's hemorrhaging money. Subscribers are abandoning services and just going on back to in a lot of cases, a lot of people I know don't even engage with media at all. They watch reality television, and that's them. They don't engage with any art, if you like. Perhaps reality television is an art form of itself. Again, that's a kind of Wild West. So I think we're in all forms of media, we're very much at a new day, and we don't know. We're going to have to revisit this topic in 50 years. If you want to send out the Zoom invitations, I'm sure we can all come back in 2073 and see where we are then. But it's going to be a very interesting period, I think. And I think there'll be some.
I don't think it's going to take 50 years.
Well, everything's going to that'll change. Well, what the outcome is will change again, because nothing ever stays the same. Something goes bankrupt, someone else goes bankrupt, and some new technology comes along and replaces that. Video does kill the radio star, and so plus a change. Everything goes around, comes around.
And right. to quote Rush and circumstances, the more that things change, the more they stay the same, as I think David said earlier.
All right, Martin, I'm going to give you the last word, and then let's wrap this. So I would love to have this conversation again. I think 2 years. If we got back together in 2 years, I bet we'd be talking completely different.
Maybe a little ambitious. I'll give you that.
You know what? I'm at the point where I've got 15 things I want to say, and they're all blocking each other. So I don't have a last word.
All right. Well, I hope that if nothing else, I want this episode to be thought-provoking. It provoked some thoughts in me. I spent hours researching this thing. I'm going to go back to look at more of it right after this. And I really enjoyed this. It wasn't my idea of the topic. It was suggested by Patreons. Check out the Patreon situation if you want to get involved. It's a great group of people, and we'd love to see you. And we hope to see you on another video soon. Thank you for watching The Contrarians. Peace.
All right. Thanks, guys. See ya.
Say, Martin.